Ah, the birthday surprise. Get it wrong, you're serenading an adult May. Get it right, you make her day. It's why Square syncs tables, tickets, and payments, so you're here even when she's partied out. Square, here for sweet surprises.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. As always, I'm your host, Anna Pham. Across our cities, hospitality teams are facing new challenges, and unfortunately, it's not just in service, but it's also in the social climate around us. We're seeing more tension spill into restaurants, bars, and cafes. Conversations around homelessness, mental health, and even anti-immigration sentiment are growing louder, and too often they play out right in front of our doors. With an at-capacity shelter system and limited community support, staff are being asked to do the work of outreach workers, balancing compassion with the realities of running a business. And although we kind of feel that it's an unfair burden, it's our industry's continuation to meet with empathy and professionalism. That's why we're here today with the team from BetterStreet, creators of the Street Certified Hospitality Program. They specialize in helping hospitality professionals recognize, de-escalate, and safely navigate moments of conflict, whether that's an interaction with a guest that is in crisis or a heated exchange influenced by bias or fear. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Better Street as they lead us through this essential training on responding with confidence, care, and humanity.
Right on. Thanks so much, Anna, and thank you to Restaurants Canada for hosting this training. When Kaz and I came together to start doing this, it was really a combination of street outreach, which is my background, encampments, tiny home communities, addictions treatments, men's shelters, and Kaz's background in hospitality. My name is Tony D'Amato Storts, and I'm the founder and principal of Better Street. We offer street services and training to organizations that are working with people in poverty, addictions, and homelessness, and became more aware of this issue through my communication and knowing Kaz. So I'll jump to our next slide here. And Kaz, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Kaz. I have over a decade of experience in hospitality, ranging from dive bars to one of the best bars in Canada, Civil Liberties, most recently. And yeah, me and Tony have known each other through since high school, and we've been working on this concept for a really long time when I noticed that hospitality workers needed to be better equipped to deal with these situations coming into our businesses.
Fun. And yeah, so this is really, like Kaz mentioned, we were just chatting, right? Chatting about what kind of things I was facing and learning about in the outreach world. And it became just so clear that there was such an overlap. So what today is going to be, we'll talk about it and I'll just move us forward. We're going to talk about who we are as an organization, what some of the objectives are of the training. We're going to go through some of the outreach skills that were sort of honed in shelter and then adapted for the hospitality industry. Things like seeing it in your situational awareness, being aware of power and how power can be used to protect and make sure that situations go well, learning how to say no and what a good no looks like, figuring out the steps of service denial. How do we say to someone that this establishment isn't available to you right now? Using the flamingo system, which is something we'll go into detail about, communicating with your teammates when there is a challenge. We're going to touch on overdose response and a team and solo response to big crises. So before we go too far into the content itself, just want to explain, Better Street is an organization that exists to bring new energy and new tools to the way that we address problems of homelessness, addictions, and deep poverty. My background is not in hospitality. It's in finding ways for people who are street involved, very poor, with mental health issues, to be treated well in the situations that they work in. And a lot of the times, like, this seemed like a really good way to do that, to help bring people in the hospitality sector along with and give them a toolbox to help treat people really well. And in the process of treating people well, and in the process of providing really dignified service, also making sure that the service went better and the night goes better. And some of those big challenges never really flare up, right? You never have to deal with those problems. So This is just sort of who we are, our DNA, and the way that we come into this work. But following that, I want to be really clear before we start about, what today is about and what it's not about. So right off the bat, like, today is not about solving homelessness and addictions. And, as Anna mentioned, a lot of these problems are problems of a broken system that are coming through the front door of the bar or of the restaurant. And that may not be the most appropriate place for them, but they're coming in anyway. So how do we deal with them and how do we have a good response to them? It's not about turning you or your staff team into outreach workers. I think outreach is a noble profession. I think it's a wonderful thing to do, but I want to live in a city that has amazing bars and restaurants. And that can't be the case if every single one is a drop-in. And so it's not about trying to make anyone into that. It's also not about getting involved in every situation. We're going to talk about this in the seeing it slide, but it doesn't mean you have to run into every fire and, deal with everything that's happening out on the street. It's about knowing and making a good decision. And it's also not about allowing inappropriate behavior. A lot of the time when people bring us in to train, they're worried that they're going to get sort of a talking to by, an outreach worker saying, oh, you just need to let people do this. That is not the case at all. It's about deciding what is and is not appropriate in this business and then finding a dignified way to hold that boundary. So moving from what it's not about to what it is about, today is about keeping you and your business safe. That can mean the physical safety of yourself and your staff. It can mean the safety of the guests. It can mean the safety of the premises. And it can also mean the safety of the reputation. Often when these situations aren't dealt with well and there's a cell phone camera present, that can be something that blows up. And it's just not a good situation. It's also about making sure your customers feel safe, or the guests coming in feel safe. And this is really important, especially if you're operating in an area that does have a strong presence of addictions and homelessness and poverty, but you want to be a welcoming environment. You want there to be hospitality. So how can we provide that safety and use our power and our training to make everyone feel good in an environment that does have homelessness, addictions, and mental health issues? Another thing that today will be about is how do we treat people with dignity regardless of their income? Kaz has something that I really love and that they said over and over when we did this training, which is everybody's money is green, right? Like if someone is willing to pay and wants to come to your business, that's great. That's wonderful. If they look a little bit different, that's okay. Can we welcome them regardless? But the flip side of that is how do we provide and then how do we deny service? If this isn't the right place for them or they're not in the right space for it today, how do we deny service with dignity? And we're also going to talk about responding to drug poisoning because that's an unfortunate reality that we're facing right now, and some solo response strategies. So with that, we'll talk about seeing it and I'll hand it off to Kaz.
Yeah, so it seems pretty obvious, but the first step to de-escalating is knowing that you should. So situational awareness. So making sure that you know what's happening around you. I worked with a bartender for a long time that taught me eyes up bartending. And I think that this is a really important step in service as well as de-escalation. So the eyes up cycle, which is at the bottom of the slide there, is essentially you're always scanning the room. So say you're bartending, you're, stirring a cocktail, you put your eyes up and you realize that table 12 needs a flip. You forgot the ranch for table 22. That was 3 hours ago, and this is a whole new seating. You're scanning the room, but as you're doing that, you're also keeping an eye out for potential issues. Maybe you see somebody so drunk that they fall off their stool. Your head's always down and you're always focused on the task at hand rather than taking a survey of the room. You're not able to appropriately respond to things. So we've switched these up into two sections. So things that might happen outside and things that might happen inside. And if you want to take a beat and kind of take a survey yourself of whether or not you would engage in that situation or you would not, that's the first step to de-escalation. You don't have to, like Tony said earlier, run into every fire. So let's see. On the outside, if I was, doing my eyes up bartending and I looked outside and I saw two people I've never seen before in a fight, I'm probably not going to engage. I'm probably going to hope that there are other people that they know are able to de-escalate the situation. And, with any of these situations we're talking about, there is nuance. This isn't a blanket fix to every problem. But sometimes I would go engage. But what would happen if that person came inside the business is I would know because I watched them outside and I had that situational awareness that I probably would not serve them a beer. Um, and if you don't have your head on a swivel and you don't trust your gut and um, choose when to engage in a situation, then you're unable to keep control of the room.
And jumping off that, Kaz, like the reason why we start with this is this situational awareness. This is your radar when it comes to de-escalation. Like de-escalation is all about making a good decision and then executing it well when there's a threat or somebody who is sort of elevated around you. And you cannot make a good decision and you cannot execute it well if you don't know what's happening, right? That's why this is so important. It is what's happening inside, what's happening outside. Am I choosing to get involved or not? But you're making a choice here, right? And we all have that colleague who's lovely, but a space cadet. And like something could be going down and they have no clue. That person by nature, like, cannot be ever really good at de-escalating because by the time the thing is happening, it's already blown up. Like to de-escalate, you want to get ahead of things early. You want to catch it before it becomes an issue. Like Kaz mentioned with that fight, like if they come in and then they both have two more drinks and they fight again, like you kind of already lost the advantage in your de-escalation. So this is your radar, and that's what the eyes up is. You're scanning, you're cycling, you're seeing what's going on, and you're making decisions, right? This is the foundational step here. And so let's talk a little bit more about those decisions and what happens when you make a decision. So the next element of de-escalation is all about power. The reason why you want to be scanning and you want to be aware is because you have power in this situation as staff. And at BetterStreet, we break power into 3 Ps. We talk about the power to prevent, the power to protect, and the power to preserve. Okay, so what does that mean? The power to prevent is the power to prevent a bad situation from occurring before it happens. So like Kaz mentioned in that earlier example, you see a fight outside, one of the guys, gets knocked out or runs, the other guy comes in for a beer. Probably shouldn't serve that person, and you use your power to deny service to prevent this person from drinking here and probably starting another fight or getting into another altercation. So that's step 1. That's when you've seen it early. The next P of power is the power to protect. When the bad situation is happening, how do you protect yourself, your customers, and the business? This is where a lot of the actual de-escalation that we're going to go through in the coming slides lives. It's already popped off. The thing is already happening. What do we do in this moment? How do we get people to safety? How do we manage our own emotions? How do we get ourselves to safety? All those things. And then the last one is the power to preserve. And that is when the situation has passed, how do I use my power to preserve the experience and, the feeling of hospitality? Kaz, you always talk about this as service recovery, which I really love, to like recover people's experience. And we think about this a lot with guests, but one of the places that we can also extend it to is our colleagues, right? If somebody else was dealing with the de-escalation and they got screamed at, or there was an element of like racism or anti-immigrant sentiment that came forward, like you're using your power as someone who works there or a manager or the business owner to preserve their experience, right? And this is the check-in. This is the, are we good? This is the, do you want to go take a smoke? I'll cover for you. Like, come back in whenever, I got you, right? And a lot of the time people think when we do this training, like, I don't have power. I'm just one person. They're super tough and drunk and all this stuff. But our power shows up in different ways. Your power, if there's a uniform, there's a power in that. If you work somewhere, you have the power of the organization, right? You have the power to be believed. If it's your word against theirs and your staff, you're almost always going to be believed over someone else. You have the power of the front door, right? And we're going to talk about this later, but like, close the door. You don't have to have that open all the time. You have the power of lights and music, right? If something's going down, turning on the lights, turning off the music. These are all things that you can do. And recognizing and managing that power can make your job a lot easier, right? Once you've seen a situation and you've realized that it needs to be addressed, going, okay, what's in my toolbox? How can I deploy my power to make this easier? And how can I prevent the bad thing from happening? How can I protect myself, the business, the other people here, the other guests while it's happening? And how can I preserve everyone's experience on the outside, like the "are you good" checking, which is so helpful. And so, we've gone through a couple of things now, and I'm sure at this point you're wondering, like, I thought this was de-escalation training. When are we actually going to talk about how to do it? This is when we get into it. So at the core of de-escalation is the idea that I can help bring someone back to a state of calm. And it's the reason why we say escalation instead of like, that person's angry, they're crazy, they're aggressive, they're, some other expletive. Like, escalation is the word because it's a temporary state of being. You move into and out of escalation. And there are things that, Kaz could say right now that would get me into a state of escalation where I'd get really pissed off. And then there are other things that Cass could say that would bring me back down and like de-escalate me. And when we do this, when we do de-escalation well, what we're trying to do is bring someone back to a state of calm. So what this is, like, physiologically in our bodies, is there's these 3 states that we can be at. There's your baseline green state. It's called your ventral vagal state. There won't be too much of that in this, but the baseline. And that is, you're calm, you're in the moment, you're present. 98% of the people who you deal with are in their ventral vagal, like, green state here. The next level up is your sympathetic state. And this is your fight or flight response. This is almost always done in response to a threat. So you're out, you're having a walk, it's really nice, you're in your green state. Someone jumps out at you out of an alley, you go up into your fight or flight state. It's a really natural response people have to the feeling of being threatened. And this is going to be important later. You then realize that it's your friend who is surprising you and didn't realize that they scared you, and you give them a hug and you're back into your social engagement state, right? You've been de-escalated. Maybe it takes you a while to like shake off that feeling of stress, and that's your system just coming back down. Then they walk with you, they bring you in somewhere, you de-escalate. And the top state, which isn't really going to factor into this training, is called your dorsal vagal, and it's your freeze state. So, this is, you're surrounded by lions and they're about to eat you, right? And you just are like, you know what? I had a good run. I'm preparing for death. The freeze state is when the threat is so severe that people just shut down. It's not something that's really going to come into de-escalation. And the unfortunate reason is, if someone's in freeze, they're generally not really a problem in an environment, right? They may be really like having a hard time. And we deal with this a lot in outreach work, where we need to make sure people are safe and they're not shutting down and they're able to, get what they need. But like I mentioned earlier, this is not outreach work or training. So really where we're concerned with is that fight or flight, that sympathetic nervous system. And honestly, it's more so the fight than the flight, right? If there's a flight, that's okay. The person's leaving. You can continue with service. It's when they're in that fight state. And it's also important to note that de-escalation is not a cure-all for mental health and violence. If someone is coming in with the intention of starting a fight, if someone is coming in with the intention of, pickpocketing, doing some kind of criminal activity, you can't de-escalate them out of that. De-escalation is for someone who is in that fight or flight state and finding a way to bring them back down. So, okay, how do you do that, right? What are the nuts and bolts of actually doing de-escalation? And at the core, de-escalation is about using something in our brains. They're called mirror neurons. And it's the thing that makes human beings work well together. Generally, it's that you're going to feel eventually the way that the person in front of you feels. It's why when you're with someone who's really anxious and has like really nervous energy, you kind of start to feel anxious and you don't like hanging out with that person, is because they're bringing you up into a state of escalation. So when we do de-escalation, what we're doing is we're taking somebody who's at like a 9 and we're saying, man, like, I don't go above a 4, right? And you can be at a 9 all day with me. You are not going to get me above a 4. I'm still going to set limits. I'm still going to set boundaries. I'm still going to find a way to say no to you if somebody needs to say no to you. But like, you don't get me above a 4. And so then the thing is, how do we bring ourselves to a 4? And how do we communicate to another person that we're at a 4? And there's 3 things that we really do here. And this seems very basic, but this is what we teach to shelter workers. This is what we teach to people doing like mental health response, people in addictions treatment centers. It's all the same. And thing number 1 is, in order to de-escalate, you have to calm yourself down. That's the magic of de-escalation. It's all about making yourself calm. And the way that I do this and the way that I practice this, it's something that will be familiar if you have any background in like yoga or mindfulness meditation or anything like that. It's called the top to toe method. And you go through your body and you think about each part of it, you know, your eyebrows, your jaw, your neck, your shoulders. And as you go through, you release each group. You release your shoulders, your back, your arms. And as you go through that, through your body, what's going to happen physiologically inside you is your heart rate's going to go down. And your body language, if you're tensed and you're holding yourself up, is all going to drop. That communicates to the other person that you are not a threat. And this even works with people who aren't sharing our reality right now, whether they're, you know, in psychosis, substance use. They are reading your body language. They are reading your heart rate. They're reading the energy that you're putting off to them. And I know this sounds a little woo, but I promise you this works exceptionally well in tense situations. It's just really hard to do. So I'd encourage you to, you know, practice this, like going through and just releasing your body, releasing those muscle groups, releasing that tension, and letting that calmness come into you. The second part of de-escalation is using the low end of your vocal register. You want to drop your voice, not to the point where you're doing like a James Earl Jones impression, but like you can say the same thing in a different part of your vocal range and you will get a different response back from the person. So if you need to say like, hey man, you can't be here. You can't be here tonight. Like I can't serve you. You can be like, hey man, you can't be here tonight. Like I can't serve you. Or you can be like, hey man, like, I'm sorry, you can't be here tonight. Like I can't serve you. And the words are the same, but the part of your voice that you're using is different. And people recognize lower pitches of voice and slower pitches of voice as more authoritative and less threatening. So it's about using the lower third of your vocal register when you're in those situations. And then the last piece is, you know, when I talked about you're at a 4, but I don't go above a 9, you do not match their energy. Like whatever they are throwing at you, you don't meet them. And over time, it's really hard to stay at a 9 with somebody else who isn't going above a 4. It's hard to yell at someone who's really calm over, like they can do it for a minute, but over a longer period of time, this brings people down.
Just to piggyback off that quickly, I'm sure if people watching this are in the bar industry specifically, and you're handling and de-escalating a situation nicely, and then some dude at the bar who's had 3 drinks wants to help, and they jump up and they start getting really like riled up, it just makes it so much worse. It's something I've witnessed so many times, like Tony's so spot on with that. Being calm, using breathing techniques to make sure that you're at a 4, even if they're at a 9, like you just feel silly yelling at somebody who's like, yeah, man, like you're just like, you feel silly, you know?
You do, and you look silly, right? Like
Yeah,
if you're with other people, they're like, dude, you're being such a prick right now. Like,
yeah,
don't do that, you know?
yeah,
And that's so powerful, right? Like that peer pressure as well. Yeah,
totally.
yeah. And we'll talk when we get to the team response about how to stop that person, that guy who's had a couple drinks from being like John Wayne, like, I'm gonna solve this situation. Because the reality is like you're not gonna help, man. Like
Really
I'm
not helping.
not gonna help. Um, but that's the core of it, right? Like this is sort of the beating heart of the training. It is, how do I use my calmness to make someone else feel calm, right? And then everything else that we talk about is like, okay, so how do we get there? But it's about being able to know that a situation's coming and do whatever you can to prevent it. Then when it is happening, keeping yourself calm, those breathing techniques Kaz mentioned, like relaxing the different parts of your body, and then communicating that calmness to the other person who is there present with you. So going from that, okay, that's all well and good. That's all, how do we, hold ourselves, and how do we react, and how do we see it? But at a certain point, like, you do have to say no to someone. And in building this training out with Kaz, I really realized like de-escalation is often the art of saying no well, right? If you're saying yes to someone, you don't usually have to de-escalate them. You're doing what they want you to do. Someone comes in for a drink, you give them a drink, they enjoy the drink, they pay for it, and they leave. There's no de-escalation there because there's no limit being set. There's no boundary being set. Someone comes in and their behavior is abysmal and you have to get them out of the establishment. You have to say, no, you can't be here, right? Someone is coming in and they're, hitting on female guests in a way that is entirely inappropriate. You have to say, you can't do that here. You are saying no. So how do we say no well? And we work together to break this down into sort of the 7 steps of how to say no. So step number 1 is you want to get on it fast. This is where your situational awareness comes in. If a no needs to be said, you want to be aware of that really quickly. You're paying attention, you're doing your eyes up, you know that there's something going on that has to be intervened with. Step number 2 is do not turn a blind eye to it. You may not be the most appropriate person. You may not be the right person to go in and deal with that situation. That's a different thing. But if you see it and you're just like, that seems annoying and hard, I don't want to deal with that. And all you're doing is letting it get worse. And this pivots really well into number 3, which is communicate within your team when a no needs to be said, so that A, you have backup and you can find the most appropriate person. And you've also kind of de-risked yourself in this environment, right? If something pops off and someone says, oh, did you notice that? You're like, yeah, and like I told people about it. Like you've made it kind of a team decision and you've brought more allies on board. After this, when you do go in to say no, you want to really watch your nonverbals and their nonverbals going into it, right? How are you holding your arms? How are you holding yourself? How are they holding themselves? Are they holding a bottle? Like all these things that give away how they're going to respond to something. And, I'm sure you guys have all seen like the cop or security guard thing where they walk up with their thumbs in their vest and they're like, hey, like this body language is very much, I'm an authority figure, you're in trouble, you need to go, and like shoulders up, arms out, you're making yourself big. And people react really negatively to that, right? So watching the way you walk up, that is your opening move in that way of saying no. And so just being really cognizant of what your nonverbals are. The next one, and this is one that Kaz and I talk about a lot, is defer blame. So the way that we think about this is like a triangle, right? When I come in to say no to you, it's me and you. I'm the person in the way of you getting what you want. And what you want to do is bring a third thing in the room, like hey man, I would love to serve you that drink, but the liquor inspectors have been here all the time. They probably haven't, but you just say that. My manager will kill me. Like, I don't have a problem with what you're doing. I'm the messenger here because of this third thing. Always deferring blame, making it about a third thing that is not in the room with you.
This is my favorite technique to say no. I use it every time because, like Tony said, it's the team mentality. When you're not the blockade in the drink that they want to get, and you're saying, no, I'm on your team. I'd love to give you a drink, dang, but like I'm gonna lose my job because there's cameras and you stumbled when you came in, and like my boss is always watching. Um, and even like pointing them to a different place, being like, I don't know, I think there's a bar down the way. There's not. Just try that one. Like being on their side, and it's a secret third thing that's like making this impossible is the kindest way to go about it often.
Um, and often people who come in, like if they have issues with authority or if authority is a bit of a trigger for them, you do not want to become that authority figure because you are going to wear all of the like anti-authority feeling that they've had at every parent, police officer, and prison guard ever. Right. And like, I don't know, you don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. So always the third thing. Um, the next one, so now you've communicated the no because it was someone else. Keep your cool. This is the thing, homie. Like you can get to a 9. I don't go above a 4. I don't have a gear above 4. You can stay at 9 all day if you want. That's okay. But I'm not going to go above a 4. And then the last piece is knowing when to tap out. This is if you are going above a 4, right? And you're realizing either I'm becoming escalated, like they said something that for me, like I saw red and I just couldn't do this anymore, or I don't think I'm actually helping this situation by being here.
Totally. And also, sometimes you're just not the person to do it because you maybe remind them of someone else. Maybe they have issues with men. Maybe they have issues with women. Maybe they don't like blondes. Like it could be a plethora of things. But I remember um, working one day with a big burly guy, and he never goes above a 4. Like he is the kindest, calmest person. But when he was trying to kindly cut this person off, that person just like went into like anger mode and was attacking that person, like my coworkers, looks and personality and all of those things. And I was like, hey man, go step outside the back into the alley. I'm gonna take care of this. And the dude totally listened to me. He was like, all right, sounds good, and left. And it was clear that my coworker was a trigger for him.
Absolutely. And I think this is super key to in staying at a 4 that like I often think people aren't necessarily mad at you, they're mad through you, right? They're mad through you that they can't get the thing that they want. They're mad through you that you look like their ex and they're mad at there's a million reasons why like this stuff doesn't need to land personally. And by not letting it land personally, it becomes much easier to stay at that 4. And so, looking at this, like there are no silver bullets in this line of work. There's nothing that's going to work every time. But taking these steps all together, you had to say no to someone. You had to set a boundary in some way. You got on it quickly. The minute you realized what was happening and you realized early because you had that situational awareness, you got on it. You didn't turn a blind eye and wait for someone else to discover the problem. You told the rest of the team about it so that you had backup and the right person could come in. You came in with good nonverbals, non-threatening. You kept your voice low. You used those like mirror neurons to try to bring somebody down. You deferred blame. It's not about me versus you here, man. It's this other thing that is preventing me from giving you what you want. You kept your cool the whole way. And when you realized that you either couldn't keep your cool or you weren't the person to do it, you tapped out for someone else. I guarantee with those steps, like it's going to go probably as well as it could go. It's not always going to go great. There's always, different challenges and there's more stuff we'll talk about later. But running that cycle can really help make sure that, you get the best outcome that is possible in that moment. Right. And I think that's a really good metric. what's the best outcome that's possible now? And how do we get there, as opposed to how do we do this perfectly?
Right, now we're going to steps of service denial. So we all know steps of service, it's printed and posted, in the kitchen, how quickly you need to greet somebody, you know, what your ideal order is. And that is all ways to empower your staff to say yes in the most efficient and, most reflective of your business. Um, and kindly. And so steps of service is how to say yes, like Tony was saying earlier. Steps of service denial is how to keep those same tenets of your business while saying no. So the five steps of service denial is identify that someone needs to be denied service, communicate with your teammates, communicate with the individual, assess the billing situation, and then service recovery and aftercare. So number one, we're talking about that situational awareness. So my head's up, I'm looking around the room, I realize somebody needs to be either not allowed in or cut off. I'm identifying that that needs to happen, and I'm moving into the second thing, which is communicating with your teammates. Tony touched on this briefly, but this is a really important thing if you can do it to protect yourself. When you have a situation that's brewing and you might need backup. We're going to touch on this in a little bit as well, and you need backup, you need to make sure that you can recruit your teammates to do so that you have a safety net. And you also need to protect the business and make sure that if you have been dealing with a customer for, this guest has been there for an hour in your section, they've been drinking, you're going to cut them off but you haven't said it to them yet, and then they go up to the bar and drink one more and then drive home, you're putting the business at risk as well. So making sure you communicate with the entire bar, restaurant, whatever that you are going to be denying this person is really important. And then number three is communicating with the individual. So this is where we're taking every step to say no that we just talked about and applying that to approaching the individual. Whether you're approaching, with backup, just by yourself, telling them kindly with low register, very calm, defer and blame, that kind of stuff. And then number four is assessing the billing situation. So this is recognizing whether or not it's appropriate to give that person a bill and, still ask them to leave or to just eat the cost of whatever they've already consumed at your business. So this is empowering your staff to just get people to leave without taking payment if that is what is in the best interest of the staff, the business, and the guests around. But sometimes, if you do all of the steps of service denial and saying no nicely, I always say my favorite way of cutting somebody off is getting a fist bump on the way out. I've deferred blame. We've had a little chat. We've built a rapport. They don't feel like I'm the bad guy here. I give them a fist bump. They walk out. They head up the street to a different bar, and nobody is angry. So maybe in this situation is where I would maybe drop a bill, be like, come back tomorrow. Thanks so much for coming in. The end of your night here is done though. And then service recovery and aftercare. So Tony mentioned this as well, but service recovery, we all know doing that when there's a hair in somebody's salad and maybe we have to comp their wine or get them some calamari instead, and we make sure that they're still enjoying their experience. We also need to do this after maybe an escalated situation does happen. So if somebody, I think Tony mentioned like, yeah, saying slurs or like I've had that happen where somebody does start saying a slur very loudly and it's like looking around, I'm like, well, that definitely offended everyone here. And having to make sure that I go touch every single table and make sure that they feel okay and safe and showing them that I have control of the room. I have control. You are in good hands. You don't have to worry because I will take care of people like that so you can continue enjoying your night in our establishment. So that's service recovery for guests. Now, when you're looking at us, the aftercare, which Tony also mentioned, everybody knows the crying in the walk-in meme. That's real. I've done it. But making sure that you're recognizing within yourself that you might be heightened, you might be feeling shaky, you might be hurt, like emotionally, you might be feeling really sad about something that they said to you, which is a fair response. And making sure that you take time for yourself, have a cigarette, cry in the walk-in, just take a walk around the block sometimes helps. And also recognizing within your coworkers and your teammates if they seem shaken by a situation to make sure that you can cover their section, for 10 minutes so that they can go and take a breather.
I, I love this, and in the way that it mirrors sort of some of the, you know, it's hard to keep yourself calm if you don't know what to do next, right? But by like having these really practical, really like, yep, these are the steps of saying no, and we can roll through them, and we can like make sure that there's a process for how we do this and how we do this well. And like you mentioned, like getting to that fist bump on the way out, right? It's such a helpful thing to try to achieve. Um, and over this, we talked a lot about, communicate it with your team, communicate what's going on. And so we're going to share here the communication system that we use and we teach in, shelters and, addictions treatment centers and that kind of thing, drop-ins. But I think also works really well in this environment. It's what we call the flamingo system. And all it really is the combination of a color and a word you don't use that often that feels a little bit silly and that nobody would expect to be, about them. So the colors go from green to red, and then blue is kind of its own thing. And it mirrors, if you remember earlier, that polyvagal theory, those levels of escalation and de-escalation, right? Someone's fight or flight response is going up or down, their levels of safety are increasing or decreasing. And how do we communicate that? So a green flamingo is like 98% of the people you encounter. This is someone who is exhibiting typical behavior, no cause for concern, no big deal. The next level up is a yellow flamingo. Yellow flamingos are verbally escalated and causing a scene, but they're not yet threatening violence either with their words or with their body language, right? Maybe they're upset, maybe they've had a little bit too much to drink, maybe they're yelling about something, but they're not up. They're not like towering over someone. They haven't grabbed an item that could be used as a projectile. There's no reason why you think they will become immediately physically aggressive. The next level, and this is one of the most important ones to be able to identify, is an orange flamingo. This is where their verbal escalation stays where it is, but now their body language is matching it, or the things that they're saying are coming up where you're like, oh, it's about to go down, like soon. The orange flamingo is your last kind of warning before something crosses from verbal escalation into physical escalation. And then we go to our red flamingo. And a red flamingo is someone who is actively physically violent towards staff, guests, the building, whatever it is. They throw the bottle, they throw a punch, they flip a table. They are now expressing their escalation in the world. And you have to deal with that. And then a blue flamingo is drug poisoning. So this is someone who you suspect of being in an overdose situation. And we're going to talk about what to do in naloxone and all that in a moment. But the goal of de-escalation is to bring someone back to green, right? Everybody is capable of green. Everybody has moments when they're green. Everybody has moments when they're yellow, orange, and red too. Like I know I do. But how do we bring someone back? How do we bring them home into that feeling of green? And one thing I love about this system is it allows you to communicate exactly what's going on to your teammates without anyone else knowing. So you can say, hey, we have a yellow flamingo out front. I'm gonna go chat with them. Can you be my blind side? Can you watch my back? And all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's someone who's verbally escalated, but there's no physical aggression. Or there's a fight, we say, we have 2 red flamingos outside. I'm going to lock the door. Okay, now I know that they have crossed into physical violence and that response is different. We got a couple of orange flamingos outside. It's like 2 people about to get into a fight, but they haven't started yet. It's much easier to communicate it. So I really like that. And also that by using a system to talk about this, it regrounds you in the training and in, okay, if you say there's two guys fighting outside, I might respond as Tony, like the person who wants to have a certain reaction to that. When I say there's two red flamingos outside, I'm like, I'm in de-escalation. I have power to prevent, protect, preserve. It brings you back to like what your role is here and how do I play that role well, because you're framing the situation through like the language of the training and the language of de-escalation.
Yeah. And also, I think, in the industry, we're always taught not to point. And I think this is a really good way to keep that same energy of you're in control of the room. If I'm at the bar and I'm speaking about somebody who's directly in front of me, I can say, the yellow flamingo at bar 7 in front of that person, and they're not going to know. Or maybe the guests around you aren't going to hear you say, yo, there's two people fighting outside, and that takes them out of their dining experience. Now you can communicate, like Tony said, with your coworkers, your teammates, without taking the illusion of service away from the guests around you as well.
Yeah. And Kaz and I, in talking about this, like we talked a lot about hospitality and like what that means. And in outreach, we talk about holding space. And the more we talked about it, Kaz, like the more I kind of thought that those were really similar concepts, right? And in hospitality is holding space. And to me, like this is holding space, not pointing is holding space. It is saying, this is a welcoming environment for you because I've got this, right? And really bringing that forward is so, it's a generous act. Like it is hospitality. It's hospitable to do that for someone and to welcome them in without putting that strain of managing the space on them in any way. So in the last example, I mentioned a word, which I'm going to bring back here. I said, we have a yellow flamingo. Can you be my blind side? And that's not just a reference to the Sandra Bullock movie. That is, a reference to our team de-escalation response. So everything we've talked about up until now has been, what do I do with the person? What do we do as two individuals? And we've talked about communicating with the team and the team having your back, but we never actually talked about what that means. So this team response is what that means. And we've broken it down into 3 distinct roles that staff play in either an emergency or a de-escalation situation. And they are the lead, the blind side, and the cover. So I'll go through each one and what their job is. The lead's job is to do everything we have talked about in this training so far. They are the one running the de-escalation. They are face-to-face with the person. They're running through those steps of saying no. They're keeping themselves at a 4. They're using the low end of their vocal register. They're finding a third thing to blame it on. And they are locked in with that person. And as someone who's done a lot of this in very challenging situations in street outreach, it is fully encompassing to be in that thing. You are reading the person's body language. You're trying to bring your heart rate down, your box breathing, all these things. And so the job of the blind side is to watch the lead's back and to basically pull any difficult decision-making away from the lead. The number one job of the blind side is to decide whether to call 911 or decide whether to get involved. And the blind side is the one who makes that decision if there's more than one person in the room. Because generally, it's that the lead is too close to it. You're too in it to be able to make that call. And even if you do want to make the call, you have to say, that's enough. I'm going to call 911. And you pull your phone out and do it. They might grab the phone out of your hand. They might feel threatened. Maybe they have a warrant out and they don't want cops to be called. They might, assault you. Like there's so many different things that can happen. And you are putting yourself in a vulnerable situation by pulling out your phone, right? Now they're going to be even more escalated. The blind side is watching both of you, overhearing the conversation, and they're making that call. And that allows you to keep de-escalating while emergency response is on the way. The other job of the blind side is, we never want it to get here, but if it does get physical, they are only ever 2 steps away, right? And, we always say, like, you never want to have a fair fight. You don't want to have a fight at all. But sometimes when we do this training, and like sometimes younger male bartenders will be like, you and me, buddy, outside, like 2 hits, I hit you, you hit the floor. And it's like, no, never. Like, you aren't going to win that fight. Nobody wins in that situation. If someone is going to get there, it should be like 5-on-1, and they are safely escorted out of the building by, everyone who is capable of that. So that's the blind side's job. And if you decide you need to step back, right, like Kaz mentioned with their colleague who the person just wasn't getting along with, the blind side steps into that lead position and you switch. Then the third job is the cover. The cover's job is to run the rest of the room. That can look like a couple of different things. Maybe they are maintaining some level of service so that, other guests don't know what's going on and are able to still enjoy their evening. Also, they are preventing, like we talked about earlier, that guy who's had 3 drinks from coming up and being John Wayne, the hero who is like going to make everything worse. They see the person kind of step up and they go over and they go, you know what, our guy's got this. Why don't you sit down? I'll bring you a Diet Coke. Like, do not get involved with this. And their job is to defuse the rest of the room. And the other thing in this diagram that's important is if you see this dotted line between the red X, which is the person who is being de-escalated, and the door, we talked earlier about the fight or flight response. And, people think like, oh, do you have a fight response or a flight response? But often people are deciding between those two things in the moment, not consciously, but it happens in us. And so we always say when you're in this situation, and this is a job of the cover as well, make sure they have a clear flight path. Because someone, if they are up at that level, they are either going to use their flight path or their fight path, right? It's why you can't do this if the person is literally backed into a corner. If they're backed into a corner and you're telling them they have to leave, and the only way to leave is through you, they're going to go to fight. They're going to get more escalated. And so the cover's job is to say, how can I clear this person's flight path so that leaving is the easiest option for them? There are no barriers between them and the door. There's no, like the access for them is really, really clear for them to get out. And the last piece that's on this slide, I know this one's a little bit dense, is there a signal that the lead can give the blind side to say, I need help, call 911, like something happened that you didn't see, but I know. And like, the example that I always go to is with firearms. Someone is escalated and then they get real quiet and they say, I have a gun. And if you don't do this, I'm going to shoot everybody. Like I'm going to pull it out. And they just say it real cool. And the lead's job here is the symbol is hand over hand. This is something you can do down by your waist. You can do it by your back. If the blind side sees hand over hand, they call 911, right? That is the lead telling you, I know something you don't know. Let's get the heavies in here. And then, because I brought it up, what I would do in that situation is, again, stay super cool and go, no, man, like, fair enough. I will say we have so many cameras in here. Like, this probably just isn't the best place for that. Maybe there's another place that's better for that. But like we've got tons of cameras in here. It's like really busy, like, and cops come down the street all the time. Like, I don't think this is the right place for it. It's not about me. It's about all these cameras and all these cops who are always rolling through. And it's weird. You can really kind of sidestep some of those more serious things. This comes from my outreach background, so it probably won't be applicable in this situation, but it's, again, an example of how even in a situation of intensity, you bring a third thing in, you keep yourself cool, you kind of step off the line, and the blind side is going through the 911 call to bring someone in. So with that, we talked about all the flamingos and we've gone through all the escalation. I want to talk very briefly about overdose response in naloxone. So there's great overdose training available. There's great naloxone training that is much more comprehensive than what we're going to be able to do here. But very, very briefly, a lot of the folks who are coming sort of out of, addictions, if they're maybe using the bathroom, if they've come in and, barricaded themselves in somewhere, and if there is substance use, or even if, you see it out front and you just don't know what to do and how to respond, Naloxone is a substance that can reverse a opiate overdose. Opiates, used to be like considered heroin. Now it's more a drug called fentanyl and other like synthetics that are a part of that. But it's really good if you can to have naloxone in the establishment in some way. It can't freeze, so you can't keep it in your car. If it freezes, it's not as effective, and it does expire eventually, like after a couple of years. So you do have to renew your kits. There are two types of naloxone. There is nasal naloxone, which is something that you put up someone's nose and click. And there's intramuscular, which is a needle that you put in. You want to check, you probably want to use the nasal naloxone kits. And what's on here is the 5 steps that are actually in the naloxone kit itself. So when you open it, if you think you need to use it, there will be exactly this information in the kit printed out on one piece of paper. But often where people struggle with this is they don't know whether or not to use it. So again, we won't spend too much time here, but very briefly, the signs of an opiate overdose. It's often hard for people to differentiate, is this person like in drug poisoning, or are they just really asleep? Or they don't want to answer me because I'm, they're annoyed that I'm trying to get them to leave. And so they're just ignoring me. That happens a lot. So the signs, basically the way that drug poisoning works, opiates specifically, is they slow your heart rate and they shut down your respiratory system. Like that's the way that it kills people. And so when you're looking to see if someone's overdosing, you are looking for the signs that you would see if someone was drowning, because that's what's happening. Their respiratory system is shutting down. You are looking for blue lips. You are looking for gray or clammy skin tone. That's on people with lighter skin tones. And you're looking for their chest not rising and falling regularly. So, if you're taking out the garbage, if you're outside and you see someone slumped over, what I always do is I take a look. I look to see if their chest is rising and falling. I look to see if they have good color on their face. If they do, they're probably just asleep. No big deal. If they don't, then I will, say something. So first, I would communicate with the other people on my team. And I would, say, hey, I'm just going to be dealing with this for a sec. If somebody can be my blind side, watch my back on it. Then I would do what we call a verbal stimuli. So, hey, man, notice you're sleeping here. If you're just taking a nap, that's okay. Just tell me to bugger off and I'm gone. If they don't get a response to that, you escalate it a little bit. But that just means you're a little bit louder. Maybe they are asleep and you need to wake them up. If they don't respond to that, we go to a touch stimuli. Hey, man, I'm going to grab your shoulder. I'm going to give you a little shake. I'm a little worried you're overdosing. I have Narcan. I have naloxone. I don't want to have to use it. If you just tell me to bugger off, I'm good. Right? They don't respond to that. You escalate that a little bit. And you always announce what you're doing before you're doing it. If they don't respond to all of those and their chest isn't rising and falling, it's very likely you're dealing with an opiate overdose. In that case, you call 911, administer naloxone. It says how to do it on the packet. One nostril, wait 2 minutes. Other one, wait 2 minutes. The blind side should be the one to call 911, not the person who's doing it. They just ask you a lot of questions and it's very difficult to run a response when you're doing that. And then you just keep going until paramedics arrive. Now, the reason why we have this in this training and the reason why we spend a little time here is in the booklet that comes out. Step 1 is shout, shake, and call 911. If someone's sleeping and you run up to them and shout and shake them, you're going to have an escalated individual on your hands immediately because they just got the worst wake up in the world. So that's why we spend a little time here, is to give you the tools to approach that a little bit more gently so that you can get through that situation without having to deal with an escalated person on the other side. And so much of what we've talked about so far today has been about how do I work, letting my colleagues know, having someone watch my back, who's my blind side, who's my cover, what do we do? But what do we do if we're working alone, right? How do we go through these things? And this is a bit of a difficult one. It's hard because a lot of it, like you can use all the tools, but if you're on your own, you're on your own, and there isn't anybody who can come in and watch your back. But there are some ways to be less alone than other situations. And there are 5 big ones that we recommend for solo working. And we'll talk, Kaz and I will talk a little bit about these. Number 1 is if you're consistently, alone and there's concerns, having a panic button or having a button that you can call that automatically calls 911 can be incredibly useful because it allows you to stay in that lead role while calling for support or calling for backup. The other one, which I'll pass off to Kaz, is the idea of having de-escalation giveaways.
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to do when working alone and dealing with an individual who maybe they're in the yellow or orange, they're getting there. Giving them something to make them leave. So I always use the example of bar cigs. I always have a pack of bar cigarettes. And when somebody comes in and I can tell they're getting, aggressive, or maybe they're just experienced something and they're taking it out on the business or me or my guests, I'll walk up to them and be like, "Hey man, do you want to go outside and have a cigarette? Like let's debrief. Let's talk about what you're talking about," and walk out the door with them. So you're completely removing them from your establishment and taking away so much risk from your guests and yourself. Because once we're on neutral ground of the street, it's a lot easier for them to just walk away. Or even if they're not escalated at all, but they come in and, they're asking for a beer or a drink of some kind, and you can tell that they're just really not sharing the same reality as us. Just giving them a soda water or a Coke and saying, "Hey man, can't be in here, but why don't you take this and head out?" Is a really great way for them to feel like they weren't denied completely. They still got something out of it, but this is not the place to escalate.
Yeah. And there's 2 things you said, Kaz, that I really love. One of them was like when they're outside, their path is clear. Like you're clearing their flight path, so they don't have to go down that fight path. And nobody wants to feel shame. Nobody wants to feel that, right? And so much of what we've talked about at its core is almost like the removal of shame from the process of being cut off, the removal of feeling threatened. And with that removal, they don't have anything to escalate against, right? Like somebody who comes in looking for a beer and has to leave empty-handed might feel like a sense of shame. But if they leave with a Coke, great, right? They got something out of it. Yeah.
Or a coveted cigarette.
Things are great. The amount of times I've not been punched in the face because of a cigarette is crazy.
Crazy.
And the other thing is the next one is kind of knowing your neighbors, right? And Kaz, you've talked about this with Civil before. Like, if you're alone, who's next door? Who's across the street? Like, do you have a WhatsApp chat? And a lot of blocks can have this or do have this, and like using it, right?
Yeah. We had a little group chat for a bit where essentially if we cut somebody off or somebody was an issue, down the street, we'd all get a message saying, "Hey, this is what the person looked like. This is what happened. They're heading west." And now we know that if somebody comes in, um, and they match that description, they seem elevated, we can stop the interaction at the door before allowing them to sit down, settle in, maybe receive food or drink, and then it's a lot harder to remove them once they've relaxed in. So having, yeah, that communication is great, but also having backup. If you are alone and I'm working and I get a message saying like 911 at, and it's one door down, I'm going to run out the door and make sure that my girl's okay. And so now I can act as the blind side because we're working as community, as neighbors instead of individually.
And going a little bit out of order with this, like calling 911, using the panic button, sometimes that is what you need, right? Like sometimes there are situations where you're like, we need paramedics, we need fire, we need police, we need that. But I've called 911 a lot. It's not what it is in movies. There's not like choppers coming in and people rappelling off ropes and they're there in 30 seconds. Your neighbors will be there first, right? And even if that 911 call needs to be made and still needs to happen and everything like that, you want someone there sooner to help you manage that situation. And that is what knowing your neighbors and that like depth and community can be. I was also thinking, Kaz, while you were saying that, like, this is the prevent and protect part of that situation, right? By hearing about it first, by having situational awareness beyond just me, but as a block, I now know that person's coming down. I know what they look like. I know they're not getting in the door. And this goes to our next piece, which is access control. You don't have to have the door open. Like if someone's coming in and you get the text from that group, hey, they were really aggressive, they had a weapon, they were whatever it is, like you're closed. And because this was something I learned from you.
Yeah, I've had to do it a couple times where there's somebody outside because I have my situational awareness and I'm looking outside and I see a guy with a weapon and he's banging on windows and doors and defacing buildings. I lock the door. And then if a guest would like to leave, I say, you are welcome to, but I am locking you in for your safety at the moment, and you're free to hang out until that person is cleared. Or I can walk you out the back door, and it might be a little bit safer because they're at the front door. But yeah, just maintaining control. Barrier to entry is the easiest way to de-escalate because you are not interacting with that person.
100%. And with the guests who are in the business as well, like this is where that personal de-escalation comes in with the solo response, is when you're locking that door, you're still at a 4, right? You're not running and going, whoa, no, like panic, lock the door, like pulling the blinds. You're like, no, like you're locking the door. You're like going to the tables like, hey guys, there's something going on outside. This happens once in a while here. We've got it handled. Door's going to be closed for a while. If you need to leave, let me know. If you're going to hang out for a little bit till the situation passes, great. Now, all of a sudden, again, hospitality, they feel cared for, they feel safe, they feel you know how to manage a situation well, and they don't have to worry about it, right? And you prevented it from ever coming in. You like maintained their experience through the evening.
I was going to say the protection isn't always about protecting. I mean, it's primarily about protecting yourself and your guests, but it's also about protecting and preserving the experience of hospitality and never pulling that cover back on your service. I'm sure we've all heard the saying, hospitality is it's like a swan, on the surface, you're calm, cool, and collected, graceful, but under the water, you're kicking like crazy. And this needs to all be happening under the water at all times.
Yeah. And that is what, I mean, that's also kind of the core of de-escalation, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
you are at the top, you're a 4. Underneath, you are like, who's my lead? Who's my blind side? Who's my cover? What's the flight path? What's the flight path? How do I get to here? But like, you're trained, you know what you're doing. Your team is trained. They know what they're doing. That's another part of this. And, is having it that everybody knows how to do this. And like you've run scenarios. And with that, that's the close of our formal training here. But this was described as our level 1 training. And it's that because, what we went through today was, how do you see it? What's an individual response? What's de-escalation? What's a team response? And we tried to give you, within a reasonable amount of time, some quick hits on all those things so that you and your teammates know how to respond to this in a good way.
Ah, the birthday surprise. Get it wrong? You're serenading an adult May. Get it right? You make her day. It's why Square syncs tables, tickets, and payments, so you're here even when she's partied out. Square, here for sweet surprises.